Okay, welcome to week 9. We're at literally 5 classes left, which is crazy, but I hope you guys are enjoying the course as a whole. So a couple things. Week 9, there is the discussion board open for this week, and you know, on the discussions, you'll notice that these start to taper off a little bit. So, you know, after this week, there's only 3 more discussions, even though there's 4 more classes, or 5 more classes. And that's just because as the assignments are opening and moving towards that final presentation, this whole part will kind of be put behind us. But do keep participating if you can. This one here, again, it's open till midnight, so I won't do any of those markings till after. And it's just taking the particulars of the week 8 assignment and just filling out the contract. So just have a look at that. The week 8 assignment, what I wanted to just quickly comment on that. So I am almost done marking all the week 5 assignments. So you'll see my comments and everything. I hope you'll find them helpful. With the week 8 assignment, again, it's one diagram for the one problem statement here, and be specific. So some of the comments that I listed from week 5, I got several where you would write the cloud. Tell me about the cloud. Right? Say what the item is. Say what you're proposing. So, you know, obviously, I hope you guys see I'm not a very difficult marker by any means, but I just want to help prep you guys and get you all ready for when you go in front of the world and start talking about these sort of things. So keep taking the mentality that you're giving this diagram to me as a project manager, right? So you're in the week 5 assignment. It was, you know, I've got these 3 potential projects, and you're giving me potential solutions on how to collaborate. None of these have to be spot on 100% perfect, but I've got to be able to receive them and say, okay, I see what you're proposing. Maybe as a project manager, then I'll take your solutions. And again, it all funnels into scope, schedule, budget. Is it doable? Will it work with the makeup of the project, etc.? So I'm giving you a lot of the particulars here. Oftentimes in the real world, you just dumped in. We'll call you into a meeting and we'll say, okay, we've got this project. It's a school. I've got these 4 entities. Somebody's using Revit. Somebody's using Inroads. How do I share? And oh yeah, we've got to do cost estimating and clashes. And I'll just stare at you. And then, you know, you're looking back at the PM, and you got to say something. And it's fun, it's challenging, sometimes it's scary, but yeah. And they expect instant, and I'll get back to you. But you know, you get back with diagrams like what I'm asking. So that's the reason for these assignments, right? And again, just take note of the particulars that I've written here and come back with a diagram. A lot of the way you guys portray diagrams in assignment 5 are awesome. I have great examples where some of them are just really well done, okay? So, yeah, just keep that going forward. And, yeah, and don't leave this until the last minute, please, please, please. And we can talk more about it after if there's any specific questions on the assignment. This week, I can't remember if I have, yeah, we do have this quiz. So a quiz opens this week. So again, just like the other ones, don't wait too long, please. When they open, my argument is the sooner the better. Just do it. So it'll open it upon the completion of this class. And with quizzes, you've got 2 weeks, so until the 16th. So coincidentally, the quiz plus assignment 8 converge on the 16th. Do note, though, the quiz is at 1 p.m., not 3, and assignment 8 is the week 8 assignment is due at 1 p.m. and not 3. That was because last week I noticed attendance was a little bit low because of the, I think because of the deadline being 3 p.m. Shrey asked, could I share the best assignment to learn from? Possibly. There are several good examples. Let me think about that, because I don't know if there's actually any rules around how that actually works. So let me think about that. See how to best approach that. Okay. So this week, the focus is legal and contracts. And I kept prefacing this. So, when you look back at what we've done to date, it's all under the premise of project definition and deliverable. That's this course title. We've gone through what BIM is, client requirements, talked about execution planning, software and collaboration, so BIM authoring tools, sharing stuff. And every time I was in these, I kept saying, imagine the legal aspects. Uses for our model. So we have all this info, what are we going to do with it and why? What are our required deliverables? And then creating overall solutions. In the legal aspects, everything already said. Think about, well, why don't we just do it? What are the barriers? Why do we go into these firms and, it's like you're trying to convince them not only that BIM is good, that, hey, do you even know what BIM is? And, what is this legacy mentality that you're clinging to? Or what's this angst about BIM or technology? And why are you not just doing these things that make you efficient, make the projects better, connect your teams, connect the various entities, and just make information flow from start to finish? And that's start to finish of projects and of life cycle of assets, not start to finish of my effort as the architect. And there's reasons, unfortunately. So that's what today is about. I'm going to go through a presentation that just touches and hopefully exposes you to some of the issues that we face as licensed professionals. And the point is not for you all to walk away from here and say, okay, great, now I'm comfortable legally. It's just to walk away to say, I understand that there's a perspective that these stamping professionals carry, licensed professionals, and I understand that unfortunately there's a bit of a battle and a constant battle that we'll have to go through in order to continue to build a comfort level around what it means to do BIM. So I'll start with these two pieces. I'm going to come back to both this contract and this. So I'm an architect, a professional architect, so I'm very familiar with this contract. Just to get a couple things out of the way, the RAIC, or this is the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, they've created this standard document for architects to use. Then depending on where I practice, so I practice in Ontario. Ontario has its own standard that's based on this national one, but made more specific for Ontario. As an architect, I don't understand why, because it's pretty similar. Some provinces have their own standard, other provinces use the national, and this is just Canada. America, the United States, has the American Institute of Architects Standard Contract, and I'm speaking architecturally. Engineers have their own contract, and then in Canada, the CCDC, which is, I can't remember what it stands for now, but the CCDC has contracts for contractors, whether it's a lump sum contract, stipulated price, cost plus, design build, etc. They have a whole host of standard contracts. So that's a lot of whatever there. Point is, standard contracts. Today, when I mention RAIC, I mean Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, UK RIBA, Royal Institute of British Architects, they have standard contracts as well. I will come back, but I just wanted to point I'll do this. Like with anything, I say, search for BIM, and there it is. 2 lines of BIM, nothing else. And what those 2 lines say, if I just zoom into that, if BIM is being used, use the contract appendix. That's all it says. So the architects have kind of stepped back and said, look, the associations, they said, we don't know the particulars of BIM. We'll leave a BIM professional organization to build contract language. But this clause is saying, if you're doing BIM on the project, include the appendix. So the greatest break is when other firms, any firm, and IBI is the same thing, they have their own internal standard contracts. When this clause was added, I don't know, 3 years ago, some people knew, some people didn't. So oftentimes you'll be on projects and you'll say, oh, cool, can I see the contract and can I see the BIM portion of the contract? And you get this blank look, like, what are you talking about? There's no BIM portion. And then you go, okay, so we'll have to deal with that. When there's a BIM portion, it's either, and this was what the discussion board was about, it's either from this Institute for BIM in Canada, and so that's the logo. They're a national organization that looks to just kind of bring professional organizations together to talk about issues that impact the profession. They're a subset of Building Smart Canada, which is a subset of Building Smart International, and they're associated to the Canada BIM Council. Canada BIM is the business voice. IBC is kind of this professional association, non-for-profit. They created this contract, which we'll go through, and that's what the presentation will talk about, and then we'll come back and have a look at these. So that's what I'll talk about today: the architecture contract and the BIM appendix. In the perfect world, every single project would have a BIM contract appendix that would bring things that would allow for agreement of items, and then subsequently the BIM execution plan would expand on these things that are being agreed upon. So let's talk about this. Now, the other thing you'll note, if you come face to face with a lawyer and say, what do you know about BIM? Oftentimes you'll get an I don't know much about BIM. So part of when I go and do teaching, I actually teach at the University of Toronto's Faculty of Law in one of the construction law courses. One lecture, hour and a half, but at least I can introduce BIM. And usually when I ask who's heard of BIM, dead silence. See, but these are I think 30-year law students, never come in contact with BIM. So when we did this initially, I put this disclaimer in. Andrea Lee is a colleague of mine who works for Laholt LLP. She actually has an architecture degree and then went into law. So she wanted to pursue construction law, bringing the familiarity she has with architecture, liability, and BIM itself. So from a BIM perspective, these are the questions I pose to legal, and these are the questions that you should just think about. Who's accountable for the information? And more importantly, when? Because this is something that comes up all the time, okay? I'm an architect. I'm going to stamp a drawing. I'm going to deliver something. I'm going to deliver what's part of my contract. What if there's something wrong? What if there's a discrepancy down the road? What if something changed after I delivered? How am I still responsible? How is one professional liable when multiple professionals are potentially authoring common models, data, components, etc.? So think about the Revit Central model, okay? Multiple people from multiple entities working on common components or common models. Am I responsible as architect if somebody else messed something up? What if somebody else messed up something intentionally or unintentionally that was a representation of my responsibility, but it went through their jobs? So what if structural is showing their columns, but they have my architectural items? By mistake, they moved the door, printed their drawings, stamped it, goes to site, the hole or the formwork for the concrete has the door 1 meter to the left. Am I responsible? Is structural responsible? Is it a coordination issue from the contract? What does that mean? What happens when shared virtual models become the deliverable? So there are no drawings, there are no specs, and I'm just delivering my model. What does that mean? With my BIM hat on, I say, yeah, that's awesome. But as an architect, what am I responsible for? And then knowing that, or from your perspectives, knowing there's a question of what am I responsible for, what am I potentially liable for? That's this angst that sits in our heads regardless of what we're doing technologically. So I mentioned There's standard forms of contracts. So the REIC document 6 is the one we'll open. As I mentioned, in Ontario, they have their own form. This is just an FYI for you all. Inside these contracts, you start to state who's responsible for what. And this is interesting because think about existing conditions modeling and existing conditions validation. The client is responsible to make all existing stuff available to architects and engineers. Okay? And then we need decisions. What if there's a delay? But what if the delay is because the client can't decide what they want? It's not because of BIM. It's not because of delivery. It's all about decision making. Okay? The engagement of specialty consultants. So remember in that collaboration diagram, you've got, I deliberately put multiple disciplines. So as I said, you all come from different backgrounds, countries, levels of familiarity, but you're going to be thrown on projects. And you're going to have, what if I said to you, okay, well, don't forget the noise consultant, the corrosion consultant, the people mover consultant. You're going to say, what are you talking about? And all of these people could be people contracted directly to the clients. But then you're now the BIM coordinator, and you've got to connect them to your project. And I'm the architect, and all of a sudden you're connecting people who aren't even part of my design team that are now influencing my design and potentially touching and modifying the information that I'm accountable for. And they're not even on our project, they're in from the client. As a consultant, I can fill out my scope of work. I can analyze the client's requirements and coordinate my subs. But notice that it's still very traditional in that I have sub-consultants. Again, what happens in the BIM world and why BIM scares a lot of people is because that hierarchy of, okay, one entity, you are leading and directing all these other ones. Well, no, in the BIM world, we're all kind of together. Okay? And that really messes up the perspectives. It changes how people think about the project or brings the fear. If an architect has hired a structural engineer, yet I am struggling to lead and direct, does that mean I'm going to have my information that will be compromised? And those are questions. Those are questions that come up all the time. Standard of care is very important. It's the expectation that reasonable professional standards existing at the time of the work are being met. So what that means essentially is, Brent, as an architect, you're going to meet the professional standards of an architect. So what does that mean? And how does BIM affect that? And a lot of these, this dialogue here, I'm not going to give you answers because sometimes there aren't any answers. It's more to expose to you. So we're ingrained, as an architect, it's ingrained in my head that I am liable and responsible to perform to an expected level of standard. In law terms, it's tort, standard duty of care. So there's the contractual end and the tort end. I'm expected to function as an architect. Now, if I believe or I'm in fear that BIM, collaboration, use of technology, sharing of information, lifecycle data management hinders my ability to act as expected as an architect, then I'm going to start to give you resistance as BIM coordinators. And I see this all the time. I can't do my work anymore. We won't be able to deliver. And I listen, why not? Oh, because we want to standardize. No, that's not a reason you can't deliver. So you'll hear all these crazy dialogues around somebody's interpretation that technology will hinder my ability to function. Architects and engineers are not required to have an extraordinary degree in skill and high professional achievements. We don't build things. I can't guarantee success of work. I'm not liable if I've exercised reasonable judgment, competence, and diligence. And that's a big one. Because I've heard all the time, if I share my Revit model, I could be held liable. And the question, my favorite question is, liable for what? And then you don't really get an answer ever. Because liability is around, I've breached my contract. I've been proven to be negligent. My actions caused physical harm to an individual. While sharing my Revit model with the contractor or a subtrade or the owner will most likely never be proved as causing physical harm to an occupant. Something has to have happened. Somebody took my data. Somebody did something. Somebody else may be negligent. So maybe somebody took my perfectly awesome design, forgot to put rebar in the concrete, and the concrete crumbled and fell on an individual. That doesn't mean I'm negligent because I shared my model and my model said it'll be concrete and you'll have rebar. Somebody didn't put rebar. So it's kind of an excessive example, but that's the concept. That's the thinking process that, you know, this fear of, if I give you data and something goes wrong, I'm negligent. And that's completely not true. Copyright is something that also comes up a lot. There's a lot of rules around this. So copyright belongs to the consultant and remains the consultant's property, regardless of whether the project is executed or payment is received. And you'll get this a lot. Who owns the model? Hear it all the time. Who owns the model? And I'll reply, who cares? And I get this evil look. But really, who cares? I own what I produced. It's my copyright. Now, the owner will say they own it. Whatever, sure, you bought this design, take it. But the copyright, think of, you go buy if you buy a can of Coke, the copyright is still Coca-Cola. If you buy a book, the copyright is still the author, but you bought it. Same concept. We do design, we build it, all good. The copyright resides relative to who owns whatever, or who created whatever piece of information, and the information flows. So as an architect, I have copyright, I stamped my content, I delivered it, it's all good. Clients can use my information for whatever they need. It's what we call here instruments of service, can be used for renovations, alterations, future additions. Alterations to the actual stamped drawings require a written license, and that's governed by architectural law. So the Architects Act of our provinces. But instruments of service can be anything. So I give you a Revit model. That's an instrument of my service. Take it, use it, have fun with it. It's been documented when it was given to you and why it was given to you. And we'll get back to that at the end. But that's a very critical thing. You can take the model, you can take the CAD files, you can do whatever you want with any of the instruments of service. When I gave them to you, that was the state they were in. So another silly example. I give you a model, and you just imagine a beam being held by two columns. Okay, I give it to you. I'm a structural engineer. I've done my calcs. It's a W300, so 20 by 300. The beam's happy. The columns are good. You take the model and you stretch those columns 5 meters, and you stretch that beam 5 meters. You never recalculated, you never did anything, and then you go and you build it somewhere else. The beam collapses because it was never designed for that span. You come back to me. I don't know, we can talk, but I have no issues. I didn't do anything. You did it. And it's those types of dialogue, like I hate the finger pointing, but it's that type of thing. You can't come to me and say, well, you gave me a Revit model for a beam that was 2 meters long and I went and made it 10 meters long and the beam failed. I'm going to sue you. The judge will just laugh at you. It just doesn't matter. The contracts define duties during the different phase of the projects. And this is important because this starts to get into your, remember the level of development. So the amount of detail and information that's going into your instruments of service will be dependent on the phase. Ozan has a question here. I think it's about copyright, but I would like to ask a question about in design bid build, when the contractor is responsible for the as-built models, can the contractor use the design construction model as the base of an as-built? Is it needed to be decided? So that's a good question. and I think we talk about as-built later on. I can't remember this presentation, but yeah, there's a difference. There's a difference in the as-built that's produced by the contractor versus and the terms all get convoluted depending on what jurisdiction you're in. So the contractor can produce as-built representing what they built. As an architect, I would produce what my association calls a record drawing, but the engineering association calls it as-built as well, but not the same as a contractor's as-built. That would be, I take my design drawings and I update the design information to reflect what was built. And I make that distinction because that's using design information, not the LOD 400 stuff that the contractor might be playing with, but my 300 or less stuff reflecting what was made. So when I turn over my design drawings, the contractor can further them into construction drawings, into construction modified drawings, infusing in fabrication, procurement, shop drawings, whatever that makes sense, and then they're molding that to become their deliverable. They're not infringing on my copyright because my copyright is a temporal snapshot essentially of what I delivered for design and then what I update to reflect the record of what was built. Hope that makes sense. It gets sometimes it gets a little funky when we're talking about as-builts. During pre-design, the reason why we're so stringent with levels of development is because according to our contracts, we're only getting paid usually per phase, and it's usually in a scaled manner where I get a little bit of money in pre-design and a little more as we go forward. So I want to make sure I'm only exploring in the pre-design phase, and then I'm getting into more design during the design phase. And this is where my models will increase in their level of development. And then we have to be cognizant of information versus geometry, what is increasing. So the example of the door that I gave last week or the week before, I can model a door and it can be simple and generic in pre-design or at LOD 100 or 200. And then as I get to 300, it can become geometrically a little more complex, but they'll have a whole host of information with specifications. Spec data is very important and is often associated or linked to components, not necessarily jammed into my models. Then we go into bidding and negotiations, and that's where we're looking at selection of contractors and coordination of information that goes to bidders. Now, this is a very strict topic, and I have a couple of case examples here. There's a fairness rule, and it essentially, the gist of it is this. I give person X my information to bid on, and then 2 days later, person Y says to me, hey, I know you have a model. Can I check that out? And I give person Y the model. Person Y now has an advantage over person X. This person Y can query the model and do who knows what. Person X wasn't given that opportunity, therefore it's not fair, therefore it's against the law. So they're very stringent on what information goes out, hence the importance of quality and controlled deliverables, which is why a whole week was deliverable requirements. What are we producing? What is our model producing? Is the model a deliverable? Know what has to go out from design into construction. So this example here, and I know usually when this is delivered by my lawyer colleague, she does the case law far better than I, so I do apologize for that. But this example looked at the sphere of responsibility for the work. Okay, the crux, neither the owner nor the design professionals have a duty to advise the contractor what method to choose or how to do their work. Okay, so there's always that question of how much stuff do you put in the model? Hence why when I talked about LOD 300 to 350, that's a very critical jump. Okay, and we've seen examples where I've been asked, we deliver an LOD 400 model. My immediate and instant answer is no. We could make 400 models, but as an architect, as engineers, we don't deliver, because now you're getting into means and methods of fabrication and production. Now, this is often looking at a design, bid, build project. This gets convoluted a bit in the design builds or the P3 or the IPD world, where all of a sudden the contractors, my client, they just want more modeled information so they can just do more work. So you start to have to negotiate and figure out what the best approach is. But there is that element of liability or fear saying, if I'm an architect, I am not going to show you how it's meant to be built. I'm going to show you the intent of what I'm designing. That's what comes out of design. And that's why there seems to be this constant back and forth between the design entities and the contracting entities. Contractors want more, and for whatever reason want designers to give them more. But we've got to be cognizant of this. This example here, the engineers were providing information to the bidders to prepare a price, and what happened was the contractor relied on the engineer's information, and it caused the builder to lose money. The engineer was liable for damages. So the crux of this is, if the tender package was meant to include price information, and this is the critical piece. So BIM use, cost estimating. I'm very weary of that, because I want to always understand what is meant by that. Cost estimating versus quantities, and is that for your own risk use, or I'm going to deliver to you that this concrete has 10,000 cubic yards of concrete, and I am going to tell you that as part of my engineering package. Well, if there's 15,000 instead of 10,000, Mr. Engineer, you were wrong, and therefore liable. And that's where they'll ask, they'll say to you, oh, don't give the model because we could be liable. Well, no, but if you say, I'm going to give you the model and you can go and query the concrete, and based on the query, that will be your sum of concrete, therefore price on that accordingly, and you're wrong, yeah, you're liable for that. And it's very, and I hope I'm making sense, but I'm trying to be very specific here. Twist it around. If I give you the model and say you can query my concrete and it will be right, you're not going to come back to me and say, oh my God, I checked your length of steel and your steel was wrong. I didn't say that. I said concrete. And you check your concrete and you tell me it was right, awesome. But what are the chances of that? So engineers are very specific and very careful. But understand, as BIM coordinators, it gets blown way out of proportion. And then all of a sudden, I'm not giving you the model because I'm going to be liable for anything that's in it. And that's not true. So there's a difference there on, you're liable for what you've promised or said you would turn over. During construction, we get more and more development. It's a level of development. And I put these up here because not all necessarily my model gets more complex. There are some items, the model might never change, for example. And I'll keep referencing the door. There's only so much more geometry the door could show. It is what it is. Frame, leaf, it's got a number, it's going to reference a spec. But in construction, they're interpreting the design. They seek instructions and clarifications. In the perfect BIM world, they are continually updating the model to reflect what's happening on site. So when they get to as-built, in the perfect world, it's not that complex. But if they deviate, they don't communicate properly, there could be an issue. So law of Canada has now progressed to the point where it can be said that contractors, as well as everybody on their team, who take part in the design and construction of a building will owe a duty in torts, so that's a duty of expectation, to the purchasers of the building if it can be shown that it was foreseeable that a failure would happen due to how they constructed. So isn't that intriguing? If it can be proved that a failure was foreseeable and the contractor didn't take action to fix, they are negligent. So the point is that the information that's coming out of these models, let alone out of design, how it's being built, how it's being documented, all of that has to be done with the proper duty of care to ensure safe results. So just imagine, think of the London, the fire in the condo, right? There was a substitution made, and it's in court now. But what if they determined that it was foreseeable that that substitution would have caused the facade to burn? Or imagine, like just any example, look around your house. Imagine a door is substituted and different hardware was used, but the substitution saved money, a different functionality, but the door now doesn't open properly, and if it heats up a little bit, it might lock, thus trapping somebody inside. And all of these are just, you can make up examples of any kind, but that's why all of this information tracked from start to finish is so important, because any change, any deviation, and any lack of representation of what's supposed to be could result in something catastrophic. Our contracts call for insurance as well. There's a minimal amount of insurance, 250 grand, that's carried usually by any firm. And without that insurance, we simply can't practice. Oops, wait, there's a question here. Shrey, so an engineer will not be responsible for poor design if the contract's follow dries. No, that's not entirely the case. Well, okay, there's two things. So a poor design should still function. So an engineer or an architect would be well, okay, we got to be careful how we phrase the question. As a design professional, I'm responsible for all that work, period. I'm responsible for good designs or bad designs. If a design results in a failure, I will definitely be responsible in some form. If the failure is because of poor means of construction, then a design fail after execution. So Shrey said he meant a design fail after execution. It depends on what's proven to cause the failure. If the failure is because of poor means and proper design, it would most likely fall to the contractor. If it's poor design, executed properly, it would most likely fall to the engineer. It could be a combination of both poor design that resulted in poor means and methods, then it would be shared. And most likely, just so you're in the real world, when there's a failure, basically everybody gets sued, and that's when we all start pointing fingers at each other. So of course the engineer will say, nope, it's the contractor's fault, and the contractor will say, no, it's the engineer's fault. Every time, when I go through courses like this, the legal aspects, I'll ask myself, why did I ever want to be an architect to begin with, right? So liability, we have this minimum amount. Sometimes clients try to limit the liability to just the insurance. And we'll try to do so. We'll do that, for example, saying, you know what, sign the contract, my liability is limited to the $250K insurance, which makes sense. If something fails, I have insurance to cover me. Oftentimes clients say, yep, that's not enough. I want you to have insurance up to 1 million liability, 5 million liability. Sometimes there's crazy numbers. So we might end up getting project level insurance to cover. But again, think about this, right? Imagine there is some increased insurance. And then there's this in the back of the minds of architects and engineers. So it'll be something like, You BIM folk are coming to me, telling me to share all my info, give this stuff to my engineers, to contractors, to owners, to all these trades. I believe I'm opening myself up for liability. What if there's a claim? What if I have to pay out? What if my insurance goes out? All these things float in our heads. And then you sit down and say, why can't we just do BIM? So from the BIM world, we know this. We know there's these issues of professional liability, issues of copyright, issues of due diligence, issues of standard of care, and all these expectations. So in the US, they started probably about 10 years, 10 years ago. God, it's been a while now. That was their first BIM protocol. And essentially, this, if you find AIA document E202, it's your first hint of the LOD matrix and starting to list responsibilities. Canada, there was no standard contracts until 2015, and the IBC came out with the contract appendix, which I shared with you, and then there's an element table that either the IBC uses or you can use just an LOD table that's now pretty standard everywhere. And the concept is, and I'm going to go, I think this goes back to week 1. What are you BIMMing? Why are you BIMMing this? If you can, I say this continually in IBI, when I'm presenting anywhere, if you can say what you're doing and why you're doing it, everybody's aware, everybody can be responsible for what they need to be responsible of, and probably most importantly, expectations are set. So again, if I give you the model and I tell you I modeled my concrete perfectly, you're not going to come back to me and say, well, why are your shingles not modeled perfectly? I'll say, well, those weren't meant to be estimated. Concrete was. At CH2M Hill for years, and I was working on the water and wastewater treatment plants. The most important were the pipes and the concrete, the two most expensive items. And then slowly, when they got confidence in the model, they started to take note of the steel when there were superstructures made of steel. But the amount of concrete put in those pipe galleries, filters, and a whole host of chemical storage, blah, 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 it was incredible. Concrete and pipes. And on a design build project for that firm, if I could have quantities nailed down for those two elements, that was the most important thing. So in the contract appendix, and this is going back to this guy here. Just going to quickly go through a couple of these parts here. So there's the definitions, there's these clauses. So basically what I'm talking about is some of these provisions. So when I say Article 1.5, that would be this guy right over here. Article 1.5, project participant may require blah, blah, blah. So what this is, some of the key provisions. So I'll say to all of you, read the IBC contract appendix. It's very important, very important. So this provision, it says all parties are required to prove the appendix has been incorporated into the contracts on the same project. So what that means is, I've got 5. So imagine week 5 assignment or the week 8 assignment. You've got all these entities, right? You're all going to agree to work on a project. Now, when we get to the last slide, or remember the previous weeks I alluded to design build versus IPD. If we're in integrated project delivery, it's just a happy place. If it's any of the other contract modes, we all need to agree. So I'm not going to put the appendix on my contract and none of you put it on yours. So we all agree that everybody on the contract has implemented the appendix. We clarify the participation of the subcontractors and the contractors. Okay? That when they're participating, they're not designing. And that's important because there's rules against that, especially in the design, bid, build world. But we want the contractor to be involved. We want integration. This is the BIM, the point of BIM, lifecycle data management. I'm doing something in design. I would love a contractor to say, you know what, that won't work. Could you please do A, B, and C? Constructability review, all important. Each model element author grants a non-exclusive license for the other participants to use the content for design and construction purposes for the project. only. Huge. So this is, can I share my Revit model? Well, yes. According to the contract, 100%. And according to the contract that we've all signed, you're going to share it. Others are going to use it just for this project. We know that. And we state a model element author. So that's important. Remember the LOD matrix. The MEA says architect is going to do the doors, engineer will do the columns, structural, mechanical engineer will do the duct, etc. So we know who's modeling what. And then notice 2.6. Alterations are the sole risk of the participant making the alterations. So if I put up my exterior walls and you go and start to play with them and move them, as opposed to telling me to move them, there'll be a break. So imagine that some of the comments I made on the week 5 assignments, and again, none of the comments result in mark removal, so just be clear on that. But some of you took the approach of the on the building, well, the high-rise specifically, where you had Revit whips in their own environment, and then you had them shared in a something, whether it was in a ProjectWise or in a BIM 360 or whatever environment. So, but that's a delineation between whip and share. And one of the comments I gave was definitely workable. I would challenge that because I'm all about it being an overall shared and a whip environment together. Come play in my sandbox. That's the approach I like to get. That's what this 2.6 work is trying to address. Because I did a lot of work in the UK where they said, I don't want you to see my whip. I'm going to work on my model in my environment. So like a lot of you had in that diagram, my Revit is in my lab. I'm happy with it. If I have multiple offices in my firm, we'll share. When we deem it ready, I'll put it out in the cloud for you all to consume. Okay, so think from that perspective. So whether you're doing your own separate whip and sending it out, or whether we're all together in the one big sandbox, 2.6 still applies here. Because if I am the author of the door, and so let's say I'm in my own whip, I put my model out there, and then you're civil, you grab my Revit model, you look, you see where I put the overhead door, and then you say, no, I'm going to move that overhead door because I'm configuring my road and I want to enter the site from here, so the road's going to come in here and I'm going to assume the door was moved. Well, no, I didn't move the door, you did. So when we come to a meeting, or let's say we were at project completion and you decided to move the door, you'll be fixing that and you'll be putting it back, because that wasn't happening. And then if we end up going to litigation because you say I'm not, you're going to have to pay me to move it, and it could get really nasty over something really silly, right? And then you say, well, hold on, if this clause wasn't there, I govern the road, I'm telling you where to come in, and there could be some interesting dialogue around there and who's responsible, etc. So this is saying very simply, door, architect. Civil, if you alter and expect the door to move, no, you better have the conversation. And more close to home for me, walls and door, I have the door located and the concrete, the forming is being done, and they move the formwork, and they say, well, great, now just move the door. Wait a minute, I can't, because now it won't be barrier-free access, and it'll be a code violation, and we have all that back and forth. L26 says you move that formwork back or there's an error. So dwelling on that a bit, but it is very important because that's the issue. If I put my Revit model out there, for example, I'm picking on Revit a lot today, but I put my Revit model out there and it's a central model, and you open it and you move the door, you're incorrect. You're liable potentially if there's a financial impact. Don't move the things that you're not supposed to move. And when you go into the real world and you get experiences like this, you're going to hear people say, oh, I'm going to move the structural columns because this is what I want to see. And I'll say, well, why don't you just talk to structural? Oh, it takes so much time. Like, that's the worst answer. And I don't even know what to say to that. So I come from this diligence world where, if I want the column moved, I'm not going to move it. I'm going to identify that there's a change I want, and I'm going to go to the model element owner and ask it to be moved. 2.7, licenses may be suspended or revoked for non-payment or breach. So basically, yeah, we're not sharing, If I'm not paying you, you're not paying me, we're not satisfying the payment terms of the contract, or you've breached any of the other clause, you can't use stuff anymore. Section 3, let me just go back to the contract here. So this is going through the copyright piece, is the sharing, and then Section 3 talks about risks and reliance. And this is saying, with the protocol, your use or reliance on the model is inconsistent with the defined uses, it's your risk. That means I made the model for making my drawings, and you've decided to take it into a full-born cost estimate, your risk. Because I told you my model is not meant for estimation. It's not a defined BIM use. So notice how this all kind of trickles into the BIM execution plan, only it's pulling it up and putting it at the front at the contractual level. So as a BIM coordinator, when we come in and we say, great, what's the model being used for? I'll be explicit. Well, according to my contract, it's for these two things. Clear waiver of consequential damages as a result of any modeling activity. Okay? So what that's saying is, liability of all parties relating to modeling shall be limited to direct damages only. Meaning, if you go and do something on your own, it's at your risk, thus removing any and all fear of, can I give them my model? Can I give them my Civil 3D model, my DTM? Can I give them my piping model? I couldn't care less. Give them whatever digital info you want. This is protecting everything. It's wonderful. Section 4 sets out the extent of modeling, anticipated uses, provisions of record, as-built, post-search, etc. Now, anticipated uses is important because you may not know at the front, but at least it's setting the premise. As an architect, I can comfortably say what I'm comfortable to do in order to meet my deliverable. Okay? Now, this is critical. I'm going to keep saying that because remember, this is being filled out by every entity. So structural, mechanical, electrical, civil, piping, instrumentations. What are they all comfortable for? And what can their models be used for? So maybe the piping model with its associated process instrumentation diagram might have a pretty clear use to asset management. And I say that because most likely, or almost every plant project I was on, that instrumentation diagram feeds directly into the SCADA operation screen, SCADA/operation screen. So there always is a tie to asset management from the instrumentation and piping world, not architecturally or from the building world. There could be ties to a building automation system. That would be a question here. Is that included? Yes or no? And if no, that's okay. It could be an extra service that could be considered outside of the contract. IBI does that a lot. Traditional design project, here's a whole host of things, our asset management system, our energy optimizer, a whole host of things that we could put on the table for a client. But as an architect, it's not part of the base contract. Section 5, and we'll come back to this after. Protocol and model management. So, who are our authors? If we don't know that, it's very disturbing, okay? Levels of design, so LOD, sorry, this was my colleague from Blue Holt. Level of development and associated uses for each item in the milestone. What are the milestones? Is there a classification system to be used? So omni-class, uni-class, master format, etc. And then a model element table, your LOD matrix. Okay? That's what it calls for. And to have this actually built into the contract makes the life of a BIM coordinator so much easier. I can't even express it. Because you're not dealing with, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know why you're asking me. I'm not comfortable with any of this. Go away and let me do my traditional design in a way I'm comfortable with. I'm afraid of being negligent. I might be liable. I don't like technology. BIM is horrible. And it's great. Like you can, and I've been in this, 15 years now. I've heard this over and over. And this addresses all of that. You know, one of those BIM myths I said, if BIM is there, my scope increases drastically. No, because if I've stated what I'm doing as an architect, what that's just telling me is that there are going to be others on the project that are doing things as well. Okay, so very critical piece. And from a BIM coordinator's perspective, you might be sitting there saying, well, oh my God, what if I'm asked who the model elements are, authors are? How will I know? So that's why in IBI, we have some standardized, we've tried to standardize what we show in the LOD matrix. And I apologize, let me just quickly pop that open. Where are we? Sorry, industry. There we go. Because the reason I want to just quickly pop this open here, this is the out of the box one. So we'll, why is it asking me that? Okay. So while that opens, what I'm trying to say is from a BIM coordination perspective, you may or may not know who the right person is to put in these tables, but from a design perspective, we know. And that's very critical. And now it doesn't want to open for whatever reason. So if it does, okay, fine. But the point is, we know. We can advise on what should be there. So from an element, if you said to me, well, who does the concrete wall? Archer's truck. Well, I can tell you who's liable for concrete. I can tell you who specifies concrete, and I can tell you who to probably put there. So the dialogue can occur, and it occurs based on professional practice, right? I know what I stamp. I'll never stamp rebar and concrete. I will stamp exterior walls, interior walls, stairs, rails, etc. So we can start to understand doors, windows, roofs, all these architectural components, cable trays versus ducts versus beams versus columns. You're going to have varying engineering disciplines. So you'll have the expertise to know, to help determine who's responsible for what, and then that'll help you fill out the LOD matrix, which I really, really wanted to open right now. But it's got to think, apparently. There we go. Weird. All right. Right. So remember here, so just to go back to this, oh my goodness. Sorry about that. So the model element table, this is what I'm talking about here, is that, you know, for each phase, this is what would be included of schematic, design, development, contract documents, your level of development, your model element owner. These are the two items. And, you know, and the reason it's split by phase, and using a good example here, foundation walls. This is a structural item, but maybe I'm the element owner during schematic design. Because that's that, and we've had this dialogue where this fluidity of, yeah, we need to quickly make the building, make the space, I need to arrange it. So I might be taking responsibility in schematic just for the sake of creating the concept, but then structural would do the design and then be responsible for the contract documents. So sometimes there's elements that might flip, but for the most part, it's very common, you know, what elements are usually structural versus architectural versus mechanical, electrical, etc. Okay, let me go back to this guy here. So this is saying that you can use either the model element table provided by the IBC or something else. And what we tend to recommend is using the LOD matrix that comes with the industry standard now. And IBC has recognized that as well. So that's okay. Just a couple of examples here. There hasn't been, and the good news is there hasn't been a host or a lot of BIM litigation that's on the record here. So here, this question here, contractor created initial BIM based on the architect's two-dimensional plans. The BIM didn't include everything that was on the plans. Then The subcontractors were brought in to participate in BIM. This one subcontractor, NAMI, encountered conditions that were different from those in the bid, submitted some change order requests to the contractor, Walsh, and the requests were rejected. Okay? So the reason for that was the contract had some dispute resolutions in there that basically said that NAMI is bound to Walsh to the same extent that Walsh is bound to the owner, and that the BIM change orders fell within the scope of the clause. So the change they were requesting were, how do I put this? What they were claiming to be the change were proven or decided that it was just part of the game, if you will. So an alteration to the existing requirements during the work that are already required to be done. So that, I don't know if I'm making sense on this at all, but just because they took the drawings, they BIMmed the drawings, the subcontractor NAMI took the BIM, identified some discrepancy, put in a change order as the result of the BIM, but really the gist was, well, no, you're just working out means of methods using the model as your mechanism. The premise of the contract documents were still laid in place in the 2D. So it's an interesting BIM-related item that failed, but it was trying to say, hey, look, here's your deliverable 2D drawings. That's why I'm very explicit on the assignments. Doing all these models, drawings are the deliverable, the contractual deliverable. If I take that model and try to do more stuff with it, identify things, see what else could be there, could be cool. But if I try to say, oh, wait a minute, now there's a change. Now there's something more that has to happen because I discovered something by using the BIM, well, the court's not going to agree because the contract was my drawings. The bid is done by the drawings, just like if you build something in reality and you discover an augmentation or something you have to do. So it's a very interesting, but the point of it was that that the court upheld that you can't use technology as a driver for additional scope or change. And it just helps in the dialogue to say, okay, wait, so take a step back. This continual fear of, I'm going to give you my model and you're going to find something to use against me. Not really the way of the world as it stands today. If that makes sense. The UK, we did a quick study with them. From those 5 year, that 5 year range, everybody knows that 2016 is the date of the UK mandate. So they're BIM level 2, everything now pushing towards BIM level 3. This was huge in my mind because there's a government mandate that requires the use of a collaborative process and intelligent modeling tools. So this is great. The standardization is pushed into the EU right now. The EU has their own book about their own BIM mandate that they're pressing. With Brexit happening right now, I don't think it will affect BIM, but it might bring to question what a standardized BIM approach would be across Europe and the UK together. But but there's a big difference there in that part of the world than there is here relative to the implementation of BIM. You guys have seen the CIC protocol and their BIM, the BIM execution plan. So it's very close to what's being placed in their contract. Looks very similar to our contract appendix here in North America. And their BIM standard form contract gets put into anything through RIBA, PAS, or the British standards. So it's very, very, very similar to the approach we have here relative to contracting BIM and ensuring that BIM is at the forefront so that there are no surprises throughout the course of the project. Now, what if there is no contract appendix? So that's something to think about because
what the contract appendix does, like specifically that clause of, if I give you my model, you can use it, and you're using it for the purposes I've stated. So when that doesn't exist, what IBI uses is this kind of limit of liability. We've changed the name many times, but it's kind of like a digital turnover waiver, if you will. I'm going to give you BIM models, CAD files, or any digital anything. And I'm basically saying, you, the recipient for this project, I'm giving you these files that I've built only for this use. You use them for whatever purpose you want and for whatever reason you want. Have fun at your own risk. I am not liable. When you sign it, I give you the files, and it's all good. And it's a waiver, and it's very similar in nature to what's inside that contract appendix, but it's something we use when there is no contract. So I don't want to give you my model. So that's what, when I get asked, I don't want to give the Revit model because I'm going to be held liable for it. Well, no, you won't, because you can give them this to ensure that you're not liable for it. To actually be held liable for it is a challenge, but this definitely will calm many to make sure that there's no expectation of liability as it stands with these things. So this is something that wherever you end up going to work, whether it's architects, whether it's a design firm of engineers, whether it's a contractor, you may be, I would argue, I would suggest recommending this for design firms. I would suggest mitigating this if you're in a contractor's firm, because you're going to receive this from a design firm. But conversely, you might want something like this as a contractor when you're delivering models to an owner, right? Some owners want a model that's just a record of the construction. Other owners want models turned over for use of asset management, or maybe for use in an energy analysis, for use in a people moving analysis, who knows what. So again, it's what are you bidding, why are you bidding it, what are you delivering, what are the expectations, was it now in the contract, was it defined, or is it something that came after the fact and you have this fear of negligence or liability? Use this form, or a similar type of form. I think this is the last slide I had. Back to this again. So I keep talking about these forms of contract or forms of project delivery, and they are so vehemently important because, as you know, hopefully I've just enlightened you a little bit on why are we scared? Why is a licensed architect petrified of BIM sometimes? Or maybe they embrace it. I'll use my Revit model and it'll make me efficient and I can do my visualizations. I can do all this good stuff. Oh, I'm not going to give it to you. No. Why are they afraid of that? So some of the takeaways, know that there's a standard of care. There's this expectation. If I'm an architect, I'm expected to be an architect, and that expectation is governed by society, governed by the Architects Act, governed by what we deliver. I have to deliver stuff that's bound in my contract. I am expected to give a standard and duty of care relative to what I deliver contractually, and also what I say and what I imply. So if I give you a model and I say this model is awesome and you can use it for everything, I am responsible for saying that. Enter then contract dependencies, limit of liabilities. We want to be in the in the sharing information age. We want to be in the age of technology and the Internet of Things, but we also have to be smart. Everybody talks about information security. You guys have all seen cyber attacks, the data protection laws in the EU. All of that's good stuff. Same goes with BIM. We want data protection. We want an understanding who my client is, who I'm turning things over to, and ensure that there's just the right level of protection so as to empower what we're trying to do with BIM, not to hinder. And oftentimes I've seen, like when I hire BIM coordinators, some of them just have no clue. They'll just come to me, oh my God, an architect, an engineer, a project manager told me I didn't know what I was talking about. And I ask why. And it's about stuff like this, a BIM coordinator says, look, I was told I don't understand my client. Well, who is your client? And then you get a blank look. And understand that the client can be the ultimate owner, the client can be a contractor, the stakeholder, as a word I prefer, the stakeholders could be clients, review agencies, municipalities, professional organizations. So many people could fit the term stakeholder, a stakeholder of my information. And then what? If you're in design bid build versus design build, design build is better for the world of bid, but there still is a divide between the owner, the entities that are working on the construction side, and the entities that are working on the design side. And it is a very unique situation when the contractor is the client to the designers. That's when you start to get a lot of questions about professional responsibility. You know, and it boils down to these components I'll only ever model to LOD 300, a contractor saying to do it to 400 or 350. Well, I don't want to, right? And normally you don't. So those questions, and then it'll come to us then. So imagine that for a moment. Imagine the structural engineer models the beam, models the column. Contractor is saying, no, model the connection. Is it going to be a moment? Is it going to be bolted? Is it going to be welded? Model the connection so that I can properly depict it. And, you know, and you're going to be sitting there as a BIM coordinator, and just the takeaway has to be, well, normally structural engineers don't do that. So what is the answer? Is it a third party? And, you know, I would come back and say, you know, get the fabricator, get the steel fabricator to build a fabrication model. And then the contractor can have that. And it brings the liability to where it's supposed to be with the fabricator, not the structural engineer, designer engineer. But often that's a challenge. Now, IDP, integrated project delivery, is the best solution because the fears of liability, of being sued, are all gone. Owner, architect, engineer, contractor, and everybody else, we're all sharing and together. We're all contracted to work together. We share profit, we cover cost, we share risk, no finger pointing, no rubbish. It's actually perfect and amazing. I think that's the best, the only way to describe it. Unfortunately, it's only slowly taking a foothold in North America. If you've worked in Australia or other parts of the world, you've seen instances of it. This type of arrangement is pretty easy. Who's the model element author? We all agree. The protocols for sharing, well, it's all together. We're basically one big massive entity, and there really are no fears around making it work properly. The question here from Shay, structural engineer will design the junction or joints, correct? He may not model it. Not what a structural engineer, yes, but might not be the design engineer. So that's why I kept saying the fabricator. So the way most likely what you'll see is a beam and a column, a suggestive or a performance-based spec on how the joint needs to be, but the actual design of it would be done by a fabricator. But the fabricator would have a structural engineer that would take professional liability of it. But it wouldn't be done usually by the design structural engineer, if that makes sense. And I've seen this, the same would go for ducting as well, usually for pipes as well, that will design the intent, design what the joints should be, and then there's a fabricator that will actually take professional responsibility that, you know, once the pipe is built and we know what's going through and we know the nature of the material, the type of the pipe support, that they'll professionally seal it, that it will not fail due to the prescribed flows. So a lot of the engineering components go down that nature. And that's why you get, you know, after a comment like this saying, well, hey, you're a structural engineer, just, you know, you know how to design the steel joint. And other times it's you'll get well, it could be a bolted joint, it could be part bolted, part welded, and you're deferring to the fabricator in order to finalize the decision. The fabricator will submit shop drawings for the structural engineer for approval. Yes, and the fabricator is stamping it. So that's actually the whole shop drawing review process is very interesting. So often it's the engineers and architects will stamp the shop drawings stating that it conforms with the design, and the shop drawing is being professionally sealed, usually by the fabricator. Where that wouldn't be true is if the specification didn't require it to be stamped by the fabricator. But for structural steel, 100%, the spec will say all shop drawings are stamped by the fabricator, and then the design engineer reviews it for conformance. Now, if a failure happens and litigation occurs, guess what? Everybody's sued. Contractor, architect, engineer, steel fabricator, plus that engineer who stamped those shop drawings, steel erector, everybody's sued. That's the beauty of our world. So, looking forward, a couple comments. Leverage standard forms, waivers, etc. And I say that because, if you're brought in and you're asked, all right, we don't have anything in our BIM contract, what should we do? I brought the IBC contract and I gave it to our legal department and said, hey, this is what's recommended in the industry. Don't ever, as a BIM coordinator, fall into the trap of trying to write contractual language. And I say that, I've been here 15 years doing this, I'm not comfortable doing that. It's best to say, let's engage a lawyer, let's engage somebody like this a lot of this presentation comes from my lawyer colleague. Let the experts talk about the things that they know best. Don't assume BIM changes what it means to be a professional. Okay? That's very important. BIM is a process meant to enhance and not complicate the profession. So when I talk all the time, I keep saying to architects, you're still an architect. There is nothing that has changed. I'm still the same architect that drew on pencil and paper, whatever, many years ago. I wasn't an architect back then, but people I work for were. And they're still architects now, yet we're using BIM. Understand what BIM is and how to document how the process is being applied, BIM execution. Okay, that's the whole point of the first 8 weeks. What are we BIMing? Why are we BIMing it? What are the tools we're using? How does all this information come together? How do we benefit from all of this? What are the appropriate things to be concerned about? Understanding contractual obligations relative to BIM and CAD. So this one, if you recall, when I had you guys looking at those RFPs, is there anything in there that's odd? Anything in there that's forcing us to do one thing versus another? Anything in there that we should stop, pause, and take note of? And are we being engaged as BIM professionals to help answer those questions? Simple things, thou shalt turn over a Revit model that is, 100% correct and accurate quantity of concrete. I'm picking on concrete today. If the contract said that, somebody better sit down very early on and figure out how and who and when that's all going to happen. Engage any type of legal service if there's concerns. If there's something you don't understand, don't just assume. And then internally, I say engage design technology, BIM professionals to help guide your project. That's what we're all here for. A lot of firms have design technology branches. Maybe they're funneled into information technology. Some have the lone BIM individual. Some have BIM teams. Whatever it is, what I say to all of our project managers, if you see anything that implies anything about BIM, CAD, or any type of digital or technological deliverable, at the bare minimum, just throw it to me in an email so I can look and say, wait, there's something somebody needs to think about here. because it's a huge break when we don't do that. And it just opens up for the possibilities of disasters usually. So I hope that wasn't too insanely boring. I always say the legal stuff is fun to an extent. I didn't want to dwell on any of these, but I just wanted to show from an architect's perspective, when we build these contracts, we state the agreement, client, architect, project, all particulars about the project, the fee, and then I want to put in here. So here's the breakdown of the fee. Okay, and oftentimes, it could be, unfortunately, sometimes it's something like this: 5, I don't know, 25, 50, something like that. And then it goes on and on depending on my involvement. But when it's like that, imagine now, like these first two phases, oftentimes you're not getting paid enough. And remember the BIM graph, we're saying you do more early on and then decisions are made, so you do less later. But right now the fees are always inverted. So keep that in mind as well when you're up there at the front saying, hey, let me know when you get a new project. And then you walk away and 2 months later, why didn't you tell me you got this new project? Why are we always reacting to issues versus proactively planning and addressing things accordingly? A lot of times it's because of that. There's a contract that said, hey, we're going to pay you scraps at the beginning, and then we'll pay you more once you deliver the design. Well, that doesn't help when we're trying to make decisions at the beginning. So keep that in mind. It's just something that we have to something that just has to continually be addressed. Then there's all these clauses. I'm not going to bore you at all. These contracts are out there to look at. And as I said earlier, see, notice they don't even have a BIM definition here, right? So BIM is in here, but there's no BIM definition. And then the only mention of BIM is in that one clause that is right over here, saying if BIM is done, use the contract appendix. Okay? That's it. And imagine somebody not knowing what BIM is. How would they even know what this clause means, right? Hopefully they'll say, oh, maybe I should check out the contract appendix. And then when you get here, as we talked through, particulars again about the contract, so a little bit about it, when this thing was executed, the definitions. This one actually has a definition of BIM. And notice this isn't my definition, so I'm not too keen on it, but it is what it is. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. And notice I like this level of development. The level of completeness to which model elements are developed. That's actually a really, really good definition of LOD, okay? Because completeness of an element, and it doesn't tell you whether it's excessive geometry, excessive information, or both. It's just completeness. Because it's about design. It's about how these things come together. It's not about how much stuff I could jam into a model. And I'll keep stressing that. Bunch of clauses that we talked through. And then it asks, what's the model to be used for? So this is that wheel of BIM. Visualization, design authoring, design review, flash detection, cost estimating, scheduling, spec integration, asset management. What's it to be used for? Okay? So what are you using it for? And then what are you authorizing it for use? So imagine there it would be, because this is my contract, I'm using it for design authoring, design review, visualization. I'm going to authorize it to be used for design review and base quantities, or quantities of architectural components. That's my model. And then yours might have different authorizations. And then any provisions for record models. I, the architect, I will update just my LOD 300 components or less, LOD 300 or less components to reflect what was built. Or architect will not be doing any record as-built modeling. It will all be done by the contractor. Maybe. Okay? And then post-construction, will this model be used for anything else beyond construction? So maybe asset management, yes. So I understand that it will be used by asset management, but the responsible party might be the contractor or me. I don't know. And that's what that's trying to get at. Wayfinding or mapping of, so maybe we're designing a university. There's going to be some mapping and wayfinding of how to get to and from multiple buildings. And that'll be done by some external third party using Esri ArcGIS. It would look really cool. Bit of city map engine, and it'll actually work really nice. You're going to receive information from us. So we can state that. Yes, by an external party, we know they're taking our info. Any details about it, so I can, basically what I just said could be put there. Talk about model management. So there's a model element table, LOD matrix, if that's what we're using. This is very important. They call it the model manager. I'll call it the project BIM lead. What it's saying is, and I love it because I get pushback about this all the time, basically, who's your BIM lead? And they put a name there. The architect, the engineer, maybe it's the contractor. Just who? And if we could start to ask that question at the very beginning, how phenomenal would that be? Right? And maybe there's a different one at different stages, hence 5.6. At different stages of the project, there could be different model managers. Okay? And then that's actually a good one too, the expectation. So a model manager will not be responsible to ensure that the structural design is meeting the code and blah, blah, blah. They'll just be responsible to, I don't know, go to the shared environment, make sure all the models are present, have maybe an overall Navisworks model that links in all the Revit models, and maybe make sure that everybody's able to see each other's work and govern a collaborative system. That could be the function of a model manager. Maybe if we're doing clashes, maybe they run the clashes and send out reports. And that's what the contract appendix is. When this does not exist, so notice this, right? If you're doing a BIM execution plan, you come over here, you've got these BIM uses here, you do your BIM execution plan, already the contract says what the uses are of the model. When you don't have that, I've seen contracts where it simply says, yeah, we're all doing BIM as per the BIM execution plan to be determined later. Well, that's great. So what does that mean? Once we're all started working, let's all start to argue now on what's going to be the purpose of BIM and the eventual uses and who's doing what. And it's all done after the fact. Workable, better to be done before. And that, I think that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about today. So any questions or comments relative to anything I talked about today? Anybody? Okay, I've rendered you all speechless. That's cool. That is cool. If something comes up, just this is intense. Ha! Good one. It is. That's a fair. It is. You know, and sometimes, and the reason I have these 2 weeks, I don't do any assignments based on this stuff because that's just not fair. But I just want you guys to be aware that there is this insanity. It's there, and it's an angst that's behind the scenes. And you guys are powerful as potential BIM coordinators because you're coming in here. You'll be influencing and working with project managers and potentially making a significant difference, but impacting the lives and the comfort level of all of these design professionals. All right, somebody got their hand up. Let me find you on here. Okay. Sharif, I've unmuted you.
Yes, hi, this is Sharaf. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you. A question in regards to the today's lecture. There's always something mentioned in all the classes that the model ownership is still not decided anywhere, like either in Canada, in the United States, UK, anywhere. So I'm wondering, when we have a contract and the appendix, are we going to have something, a clause saying something about that, who owns the model?
I don't think Yeah, I don't think so. And the reason is because the way I rationalize it in my head, ownership is temporal. And what I mean by that is the model element authors the model element table will state who's authoring what component. So I'm going to have an architectural model, and it will be my model. Now it gets convoluted when you have, the big Revit central model. So we're all in this one big model. But at the end of the day, I will always own an instance of that model. Now, when people say who owns the model, my initial question is, well, what do you mean when you say the model? Because architecturally, the model is the foundation of my design, and what I've developed, I will always have. Yet I'm turning over digitally to be advanced by others. If that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, because at the end of the day, I guess you could say, look, the owner is going to own it because we're all going to deliver something. In all those week 5 assignments, when I said that, Revit turnover or Navisworks turnover, there's a turnover of the model to the owner. So they're going to own the model that they receive. But I still own the model that I made. But I'm not going to own the structural model. I'm not going to own what the fabricator gave to the contractor that gets advanced to LOD 400. I don't want to own that as the architect. But my nice, comfortable LOD 300 model, I will always own that, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Cool. Good question, though. Sunyana, yes, I was asking if we can ask questions after, for sure. Just send me any questions you have, like if you watch the video. This is, again, I present this stuff. I know that it's outside of all of our comfort zones. And I'll be honest, maybe 3-4 years ago, I wouldn't even be comfortable delivering this. But yeah, if you want to watch it again on the video, the quiz that opens up today is looking back, but the quiz that opens up in week 11, the questions, they'll be again all simple in nature. And if you guys have seen the quiz, you guys all do very well in those quizzes. I think the quizzes might be too easy, but it's all good. But I don't want the quizzes to be complex. So you don't have to know in depth a lot of this, but a quiz might say, is there things that architects could be liable for, and stuff like that. So it's really more generic, especially from this legal perspective, because this isn't our expertise. Side note: when I was in School of Architecture, we had 2 classes in 5 years touching on professional practice. 2, and then they send us out in the real world to go try to become an architect. So, as BIM coordinators, I don't expect you guys to carry. I don't expect a comfort level on this. The takeaway of this is, if you can walk away and say, okay, there's a lot of stuff that Brent babbled about today. I think I understand why architects or engineers should be scared. And that's it. I'm happy, right? That is the perfect takeaway for this. But yeah, watch the video, have a look at the contract appendix, and fire me any questions you might have. Anything else? Or while you guys think of anything else, yeah, so as I said, the quiz will open, and the quiz is looking back to the previous weeks. And the week 8 assignment, if any questions arise from that, definitely send it to me. I have 5 more assignments to go through for week 5, and then I'll get those I'll get those published hopefully today. That's the intent. Okay. I'm just scanning for questions. Okay. So that's all. I'm cool. Let's break. I'll give you back 25 minutes. And yeah, have a great weekend. Oh, I got another hand up. Hold on. Whose hand? Hold on. Now I'm confused. I'm trying to see whose hand is up. Sharaf, I think it's you. I unmuted you if you want to talk.
No? Okay, that's fine. Excellent. All right, everybody have a great weekend, and just fire me an email if anything comes up. Thanks, everyone.